Say one thing for Joe Abercrombie. Say he's got one of the most distinct voices in fantasy, and his fans just love to quote him. Hello, I'm Philip Chase. Welcome to my YouTube channel on the best of fantasy. Today I will be reviewing Joe Abercrombie's A Little Hatred. This is the first book in Abercrombie's The Age of Madness Trilogy. Came out about a year ago, and book 2 of the trilogy, The Trouble with Peace, is coming out very soon. So it might be a timely thing to review A Little Hatred right now. If you don't like narratives that include violence and sex while laying bare the most powerful human urges and fears with brutal honesty and a liberal dash of brilliant humor, not to mention some of the best action sequences in the genre and vivid characters that will permanently reside in your skull, then A Little Hatred probably isn't for you. If, on the other hand, you like these things, in other words, if you're a Joe Abercrombie fan, then you're going to love A Little Hatred. It is actually, I would say, a better start to a trilogy than even The Blade itself, which is the first book of the First Law trilogy, the original trilogy that introduced us to the world of the First Law. I will provide a link to my review of the First Law trilogy in the description below. Now, I recommend that you read the First Law trilogy before undertaking to read A Little Hatred, the new trilogy. In fact, I would say best case is you read the original trilogy as well as the 3 standalone books and probably the short story collection Sharper Ends. Simply because there are references to some of the older characters and some of the plots. If you're familiar with the First Law world, then I think your experience of A Little Hatred will be even more enriching. That said, you don't have to read the other books before, if you want to just start with A Little Hatred, you could do that too. But frankly, some of my favorite parts of reading A Little Hatred were the reappearance of some old friends, some characters from the previous books. I'm not going to mention them by name because I want to keep this review spoiler-free, but let's just say by the dead, it was really good to see them. Also, there are some fantastic new characters, a younger generation that is clearly beginning to take over. In the 30 years since the First Law trilogy ended, Industrialism has begun to take over, with Adua becoming a smog-enfolded mirror of London in the midst of an industrial revolution. And the capitalistic worship of money has gone into overdrive. This, you could say, is a Dickensian portrayal of a society in which the powerful exploit the weak. And it is complete with factory chimneys belching smoke in urban slums, swelling with the poor who are dispossessed of their land by rapacious feudal lords encroaching on common pasturage through enclosure, which is one word they use when rich people steal from the rest of us. There are those like the weavers, for example, whose jobs have been taken away by machinery, adding to the masses of the poor. There are even people called breakers, who are essentially just like the Luddites of the early 19th century. It looks a great deal like Dickens's Hard Times, for example. And Abercrombie even gives a nod to, a perhaps intentional nod, to Hard Times on page 256 in the book, where it says, "Hard times, I guess," said Sarlby. "Everyone's got to do what they can." "Hard times," echoed Broad. "When do they get softer? That's the question." So you have here a very old story of the poor getting poorer while the rich get richer. And in fact, it is very much an old story with lessons for today. In fact, there's actually some really great, subtle social commentary in A Little Hatred, mixed in with Abercrombie's trademark action and his humor. You'll find even some themes of immigration and sexuality woven in here, again, in a very subtle fashion. It's never heavy-handed, which is probably why it's also pretty effective. And Abercrombie's, he's capable of writing a character who is basically sympathetic, but may hold views that you might find objectionable, or even commit actions that you find repugnant. Abercrombie is a master of portraying human limitations and flaws while still making us like the characters. After all, this is the same guy who made so many of us love a professional torturer. One big difference from Dickens, however, is that Abercrombie's characters are so much more three-dimensional. There are no mere flat villains like Gradgrind or Bounderby. In Abercrombie's Little Hatred, the capitalist exploiter of the masses is just as likely to be a perspective character, one that you can't help rooting for at times, which provides a fascinating glimpse into greed and how people can justify amassing unnecessary wealth while others starve, or worse yet, how they can do so while causing said starvation for profit. Also, the capitalist exploiter of the masses is just as likely to be a woman in A Little Hatred. And in fact, I would say that A Little Hatred gives us Abercrombie's best female characters to date. All of the characters are complex and flawed, and they are conflicted, and they're highly relatable. The dialogue also, by the way, and this is typical of Abercrombie, is just clever and fun. As far as the plot goes, there are, of course, the action sequences. This is trademark Abercrombie. There are basically two major arcs in the story, one taking place in the North, with the other taking place in the Union. And we kind of weave between the two throughout the book, and they get joined together by the end of the story. There's plenty of battle and fighting, but there are also other kinds of action in this book, equally well done. And there's some brilliant use of perspective shifts to make the action sequences breathless, in the same manner that Abercrombie did in The Heroes, one of the standalone books, where in the midst of the battle, we shift from character to character abruptly and suddenly. Abercrombie also throws in some real unexpected twists, keeping the plot fresh and unpredictable. There's even a bit of romance in here, although there's little romantic about the sex, and the violence also is not romanticized in the least. People in Abercrombie's books are stripped to their most primal. There's just a refreshing honesty to Abercrombie's writing that I personally really enjoy, with some really fantastic psychological insights. A Little Hatred is actually, in my opinion, Abercrombie's most successful fusion of fantasy with another genre to date. And this is something he did particularly in the standalone books, like Red Country, for example, was fantasy / Western, that sort of thing. And so this, of course, would be fantasy combined with a 19th century social novel. So with its combination of entertainment and subtle themes and just brilliant characters, completely relatable, vivid, just wonderful job with dialogue, you name it, I'm going to say that A Little Hatred is actually my favorite read, not only of the summer, but of the year so far. It is a beautiful start to what promises to be an incredible trilogy. This guy just keeps getting better and better with his writing. Definitely one of my favorite fantasy writers. One of my favorite writers, period. He's just been doing a brilliant job, and I'm incredibly excited for The Trouble with Peace coming out in about a month. And I will definitely be picking that up as soon as I can. So thank you for watching this review, and if you enjoy great fantasy, please consider liking and subscribing. I'll be doing another review in a few days. I'll be doing a darker shade of magic, in fact. Looking forward to that. I've already started reading the book. And in the near future, I'll also be doing a video on the origins of fantasy, something that I kind of nerd out about, and perhaps you would enjoy that too. So, until next time.